Welcome to the Behind the Bits podcast. Your host, Scott Curtis, wants to learn everything he can about stand-up comedy and take you along for the ride. Scott and his guests talk serious about comedy in every episode. Behind the Bits will uncover knowledge from different perspectives on subjects such as writing and performing stand-up comedy, as well as booking shows and the comedy life. If you're thinking about becoming a stand-up comic, already in the comic game, or a comedy nerd, Behind the Bits is the show for you. Now, let's get Behind the Bits.
Hi there, BTB buddies. It's Scott, your host. I hope you're enjoying the Behind the Bits podcast because I sure enjoy putting it out there. As a podcast addict, I'm always looking for new podcasts to listen to different perspectives on comedy. I always like to find those independent podcasts that aren't hosted by the big name celebrities. You know, the ones where the host is actually doing it for the passion of their subject. I found a good one in Stand Up Reviews. That's the name of the podcast, Stand Up Reviews. Ben Guest is the host, and the podcast consists of him reviewing stand-up comedy specials. He's reviewed specials by Kevin Hart, Ricky Gervais, and Dave Chappelle, just to name a few. I really like to hear Ben's point of view on stand-up reviews. I don't necessarily love all the specials that he reviews, but it's great to hear another opinion. Another great plus for this podcast is that it's not very long. You can listen to it on a quick car ride. All the episodes are about 15 minutes long, and they get right to the subject at hand. I listen to stand-up reviews on Spotify, but it's available on all the apps. Give it a listen and tell me what you think. All right, we're back at Behind the Bits, and I've got Bill Gorgo with me. How you doing, Bill?
Hi, Scott. I'm doing well, and it's nice to hear that I'm alive.
Yeah. Yeah, you look great. Despite what we're going through, you look good. Have you been cutting your own hair, or is somebody doing that for you?
Yeah, that's been probably the greatest challenge of self-isolating all these weeks is cutting my own hair. And by the time I got brave enough to do it, my head was a mess.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of proud of the way it's turned out.
It looks good. It looks much better than my first go around.
Beard trimmer.
Yeah.
Just a little beard trimmer.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically, now I always like to mention the group that we're both in. It's the Maxwell Method of Stand-Up Comedy. One of the best groups on Facebook. It's the only group that I read every single post. Dobie does a great job with that group, and I think that the input that you put in is fantastic. And as I always stalk people that interest me from there, and I got to watch a video on YouTube where you and Dobie are doing an interview. And I also looked at your bio and stuff, and you're just all over the place on stuff that you've done. And I wanted to go back to the beginning for you and find out when comedy first started making a spark with you. What inspired you to even have an interest in stand-up comedy?
In the business, that's an interesting and a long story. We've got the time.
Yeah.
The first time it occurred to me that there would be such a thing as a career in comedy, I was still in college. And a friend of mine and I were the funny guys on campus. You know, If you needed funny copy for the newspaper, you came to us. We had reputations. And before we graduated, he said to me one day, why don't we take a year off after we graduate and try and become stand-up comics? Well, this was 1967, 66. There were no comedy clubs. There were nightclubs, strip clubs, and the Catskills.
Yeah.
And occasionally a coffee house in New York or San Francisco would put up a comic. But between the coasts, you worked strip clubs or nightclubs. There were no comedy clubs. There was no place for someone to start doing comedy. There were somehow people became comics elsewhere and then showed up at a nightclub.
Yeah.
I don't know how the process worked, the Catskills, I know, were part of it. But for a Chicago Italian kid, the Catskills were not really accessible.
Uh-huh.
So we talked about it, but we had no idea what you'd even do. You know, our hero was Bob Newhart, who started in a studio.
Yeah.
He had already had a successful album before he got hired to do live show.
Right. Yeah.
No, we're thinking, maybe we moved to New York or something for later. Well, that Sunday I mentioned it to my parents, and it was like one of those moments in the soap opera where everything stops and then there's close-ups of people's eyes going left and then right. My mother and father just looking at each other like, is this a nervous breakdown? What do we do? Do we call the teachers? Do we call the doctor? Who do we call? So I played it off. We were just joking and never thought about it again. Became a teacher, which made my mom happy, and which was my goal going into college. Then my dad, who owned a trucking company, got sick, and I quit teaching, and I said I'd run the trucking company for him, thinking his days were limited.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, but I was thinking 2 or 3 years, and he lasted 13. And that's how long I ran a trucking company and just hated it.
Yeah.
Every day. Well, about 6 months before he died, I'm over visiting. And he says, we have to go in the back room, which puzzled me because the only other person in the house was my mom, and she knew everything.
Mm.
The only reason that we'd have to be alone is that he was going to swear, because we didn't swear in front of Mom. So what did I do now? He sits me down and he says, I've never thanked you. Thank me for what? And he said, well, if you hadn't come into the company, I would have sold it. And by now, I'd be on welfare. He was on dialysis for 13 years.
Oh, okay.
And he said, not only did it keep me financially alive and prepare your mom, she'll be fine when I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but mentally, he said, I started working at that company when I was in high school.
Uh-huh.
And now I own it. And it was, in a lot of ways, my life. And while I'm on the machine, I'm thinking, how many loads are we going to pull today? As soon as I get off the machine, I call you up and did you take the diesel in for a checkup and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, yeah, well, you're welcome. He said, but that's not what I want to talk to you about. He says, I thank you, but you're not very good at it. He said, it kept me alive, but it's killing you.
Yeah.
And that's not what a father, that was never my goal. He says, so when I'm gone, I want you to get rid of it, and I want you to chase your dream. He said, you may not be lucky. Not everybody is lucky as I am. You may not catch it. But if you don't chase it, you will have missed the reason we're put on this earth, and I'll come back and I'll fuck with you.
Yeah.
Well, now I know why we're in the back room.
Yeah.
And that was an incredible conversation to have. My father and I didn't have those deep talks.
Right. And you were about how old at that time?
37.
Okay. Okay.
Well, he passes away. I sold the business. I have no idea what my dream is. So I buy a bar because, if you're in your 30s and you're a guy, why not?
Yep.
And that was fun for about a year. Then I get a call from the guy from college who I hadn't seen maybe 10 years, Tom. He says, come have a drink with me Tuesday night. Okay. Bar about a block from where I was living. And I get there. Turns out the reason he invited me is it's an open mic and he's going up.
Yeah.
And now he wants to show off. You know how guys are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's we had a little bit of a competitive thing in our relationship going all the way back. So I said, that was very good. Are you going to do that next week? He said, yes. Run home. I start writing a mile a minute. the very first mistake of many that I made in the first few years.
Yeah.
The next week, he goes back up. As soon as he's done, next guy's introduced, and it's me. And I could not tell you a single word that I said. And I couldn't, when I came off stage that night, I'd actually given a sheet to someone who came with me. And I said, okay, just follow along, put a mark if I forget something. When I came off, I said, what did I say? I have no, let me see this sheet. Well, what I do remember is, as soon as I touched the mic for the very first time, I heard my father on this shoulder talking into this ear. That's my father's voice. I recognized my father's voice. If it was just in my head, why would I recognize it in just one ear? I don't know. But he had been gone a year and a half, 2 years, and what I heard was, remember that Sunday back then? Maybe this is your dream. So I went back the next week, and 3 weeks they were asking if I would MC that weekend, because this was the boom. And if you could stand on stage for 5 minutes without fainting, you were in.
Yeah.
And never looked back. Within a year, that's how I was supporting myself with stand-up comedy. And that's what I did for the next dozen years full time, stand-up. That's my story.
Yeah, that is a great story. I have to say, I'm a little pissed off because when you said you were in college in '67, I was born in '64, and I had us being that close to same age. So you Italians, the way you guys age, it drives me crazy.
Oil. We just rub it in and rub it in.
You look good. You look good. One of the things, it's kind of a couple things came up that were funny. When you talk about what I call stage amnesia, the funny thing is I'm having a discussion with one of my friends who's a comic that we're reading the same book. It's called Not Good Yet by it's a guy I interviewed, Mark something. Anyway, he talks about stage amnesia and why it's important to record yourself because you don't know what happened once you get off stage. And I think it's funny because we're trading Facebook Messenger posts back and forth. And the last one I read before you came on was talking about the stage amnesia, and I think that's funny. But one thing,
adrenaline, by the way.
I'm sorry.
That's a side effect of adrenaline.
Yeah.
People don't realize that, but adrenaline puts you in the moment, but it also uses short-term memory to keep you in the moment. It blocks off short-term memory, so you're not there going, oh, I'm going to have to remember this.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to have to focus.
Yeah.
So it puts blinders on you. And that's one of the reasons you should always record, because otherwise, it's gone.
You lose it. Yeah. One of the other things that struck me is that you were a businessman for, a dozen years before you got into comedy. Yeah.
In a manner of speaking.
Well,
he was absolutely right. I was not good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. But to keep something afloat, you have to have a certain type of business sense, and you have to understand, what works and what doesn't work. And I feel like a lot of the comics I talked to that didn't necessarily start when they were, 15, like Gilbert Gottfried did or something like that, that have that business sense going into it, they seem to they seem to get better quicker, simply because you can step back from yourself and take a look you're a little bit more critical, and you know what works and what doesn't work, and it seems like you don't stay on a certain type of act for too long because it just doesn't work.
Well, I think that's a big part of it. I think another part of it is think of your audience. A lot of people get stuck at the open mic level because their audience is just like them,
Yeah.
unemployed 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
But unemployed 22-year-olds can't pay your rent for you.
That's right.
You have to depend on people who have actual jobs, responsibilities, children,
Yeah.
all of those life things that a lot of young comics just don't have.
Right.
So not only is it not connecting with your own responsibilities, it's not having that common ground of responsibility with the people that you're trying to entertain. I think that made a huge difference. I was in my late 30s when I started, and my audiences, my paying audiences, are my age group and older.
Right.
So I can talk about things that are important to both of us.
Yes.
And better than a 22-year-old.
Yep. Yep.
It has nothing to do with funny. It has to do with connectedness.
Yeah, most definitely. And making that connection right from the beginning is just, it's so important, because if you don't make it, then nothing works at all. It just, you lose the audience, you lose yourself. The adrenaline hurts you a lot more than it helps you. It's just not good.
People will laugh at an abstract joke. But over the course of an hour and a half, what they want is something that they connect to their own lives. Throw me an out of left field, funny. Yeah, okay, great. But I'm not going to sit here for an hour and a half and listen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're too self-centered for that to work.
Yeah. Now, when you started out, were you in the Chicago scene the whole time when you started out?
Oh, yeah. You grow where you're planted.
Right. So when you're doing the open mics and starting to get on the showcases and stuff like that, did you meet some people that were maybe a little further along that helped you out and brought you along? Did you have any mentors along the way?
Tons of them. And I like to take that all the way back to Tom Dreesen, Chicago's own.
Yeah.
And, Tom actually started the Chicago scene. If there was comedy in Chicago before Tom Dreesen, it was out of town, or even Chicago guys like Newhart, who had gone out of town and come back.
Yeah.
And were doing nightclubs that had national acts.
Right.
But there was no place to start in Chicago. Until Tom Dreesen started two little one-nighters. And every one of the OG Chicago comics started at those two little one-night things. And I was fortunate enough pretty early on to hook up with several of those comics. Jimmy Wiggins personally was the one I connected to the most. He became my actual mentor as I went along, but I knew all those guys and I learned from all those guys. Ted Holum at Fiala, Tom himself. I was a writer. Tom had a brief TV show in Chicago, and I was one of his staff writers. I've just learned so much from Tom.
Yeah.
Ken Severa, just a whole Emo and Judy Tenuta, and there's just a whole generation of great Chicago comics that started with Tom, and then brought along the next group and passed it on. I think there was at least a half generation after me that got in on that. And then, of course, once the boom collapsed, there was a little disjunction. And it was sad to see 5, 6, 7 years later, open mics having to start with no connectivity to the old school guy. By that time, the clubs that were still going strong had stopped doing open mic night. So if you wanted an open mic, you started it in a bar someplace.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of comics, and I put that in quotation marks, in Chicago now, who, if you say Tom Dreesen, they shake their head like, who? If you say Emo, they go, does he run a mic someplace? Open micing has become its own category, very different and disconnected from the stand-up scene.
Yeah.
That was a fairly contiguous tree going back to the mid-'70s.
I agree that 100% with that 100% because every working comic who is making a living doing comedy knows Tom Dreesen and has either been affected by Tom because he helped him out in some way, or at least knows who he is. And yet, just like you said, you go to an open mic or you talk to a young comic that has, not done anything yet, and you say Tom Dreesen, they're like, who? And it's funny. I get the same thing with like Bob Zaney. Bob Zaney's one of my favorites, and you mention him, and some of the younger people go, "Who?" And I'm like, these are two people who, each in their own way redefined how comedy's done. And
here's the thing: I know and can quote some lines from Will Rogers, who was dead before I was born.
Yeah.
It's not just a question of, well, they're not around, so I don't know them. You are actively engaged in a business that has history. It behooves you to know that history.
Yeah. And the funny thing is a lot of the young folks, they say, well, comedy's different now. Guess what? It's exactly the same as it was. It's either funny or it isn't, and you have different topics. There's different boundaries and stuff like that now. But you know what? It's make them laugh, and
a lot of the people who say comedy is different now have not been to comedy shows.
Yeah.
They've organized open mics. They do 6 open mics a week.
Yeah.
But open mics are different than comedy.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Comedy, now I shouldn't say that because we sit talking during an event, which I've been predicting every conversation I've had for the last month. Comedy is going to be different.
Yeah.
It may come back in some form that we recognize and connect to the way it was in 2016, in 98, in 87. But right now, in America, there are 10,000 people who think of themselves as comedians trying to figure out how to create a revenue stream without putting people into a room.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to do it.
Yeah. And
a lot of people are trying to do it, but someone's going to do it successfully.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm dying to find out what they figure out.
Yeah. And if it stands the test of time of when, this is all over and you can go back to clubs, if that works through that, then they've definitely got something. And that will be the biggest change I've ever seen.
Yeah. I put in a lot of years as a teacher too.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at what's happening now with the long distance education, and I think, how is no one talking about when we go back, when we have a vaccine and a cure? Why aren't we talking about closing a lot of the schools and doing double duty? Kids go for 3 days and then 2 days of homeschooling. You could run 2 different faculties and 2 different student bodies out of the same building 6 days a week instead of 5.
Mm-hmm.
You go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then 2 days distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
The other kids go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then every semester you switch.
You switch, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You need half the buildings, half the space.
Yeah. And that still gives the kids a opportunity to understand the social aspect of learning and getting along with other kids and stuff like that too. So that definitely makes sense to do something like that. Think of the budgets. That would totally. Building budgets are just astronomical just for electric. So to be able to eliminate, say you eliminate in a 12 school district, if you could eliminate 6 of them, that's a lot of money.
But I do hear parents screaming bloody murder.
Yeah.
2 days a week with my kids? No.
Yeah.
That is a problem. If you got a household where all the adults are at work,
Yeah.
you can't have a second grader at home doing homeschooling.
Yeah.
But it is an option that needs to be explored because it makes so much financial sense, especially if we're actually getting good at long distance learning.
Yeah, exactly. So thinking about when you're in your 30s and you start doing comedy, what did it take for you to go from, that open mic with dad talking in your ear saying this is what you want to do? What kind of time and what kind of effort did it take for you to actually start making a living doing comedy then?
The first year, I substitute taught that year. And like I said, I was fortunate being part of the boom. I was making money. I wasn't earning a living yet. But from the first year, I earned enough money to supplement substitute teaching money. Neither one of which is a bonanza, but together I paid my rent.
Yeah.
Paid my bills. The second year, I taught part-time. The school where I taught, I cut a deal. I said, I will work part-time for even less than part-time salary, but full-time benefits. So I kept my health insurance, paid into a pension plan, and really the second year, most of my income was from comedy. And by year 3, I didn't need the school income. I just went full-time.
Okay.
Because year 3, I knew that I had to hit the road.
Yeah.
It was great coming up in a big city like Chicago, particularly because of the supportive community in Chicago. But as my friend Al Alter used to say, you move to Chicago to get good enough so you can earn money in Springfield.
Yeah.
We get paid, as you know, we get paid for the miles. We don't get paid for the show. Most of us would do shows for free if we had to.
Yeah.
As long as you paid me to get there and home.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah. So when the traveling starts, what did you start working with an agency, or did you book your own shows, or how did that work out for you?
I never was at the level where anyone wanted even 10%, 20% of the money I was making, nor did I want to give someone 20% of the money I was making. But I was working all the time, and it was when you were emceeing and featuring, contemplating paying someone to get you MC and feature work was stupid.
Yeah. But
I averaged during the first probably 6 years, I averaged 5-6 shows a week. And the way that I knew that the boom was over is by the time I started closing shows, I was making just about the same money as I had been as an MC.
Yeah.
Because I was working 5-6 times as many shows as an MC as I was as a headliner.
Yeah.
So the fact that I was making so much more a show seemed rather immaterial.
Yeah.
Considering I couldn't book enough shows to appreciate the increase.
Yeah. Now, when you were traveling, did you do kind of a Midwest thing, or were you doing coast to coast?
Regional always appealed to me more because you could get home more. Still paying rent on it. I never took that leap of being the road guy who didn't have a fixed address.
Yeah.
Other guys who did.
Yeah.
And that seemed hard. Plus, I had a daughter. I had a family. And although we were separated, I still wanted to be home for my daughter. So, but I worked just about all of east of the Mississippi and some west of the Mississippi. But it was all by car because, again, when you're featuring, the idea of flying in is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Wait, so I lose money for the week? I don't.
Yeah.
No, I was very phlegmatic about my long-term goals. Keep in mind, starting when I was almost 40, with a family, I knew I was never going to move to either coast.
Mm.
Can I make a living? Can I pay my bills? I need to do that.
Mm.
So I know a lot of the young people who started at the same time I did, they made a conscious decision rather than hit the road, spend a lot more time at the A clubs in Chicago networking with the national comics. And that paid off for them when they moved to either coast.
Yeah.
Either they got gigs as writers to start out with, or they got some stage time by being bootstrapped up. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm a huge proponent of networking, but I'm also a realist. What are your long-term goals, and how is networking going to help your long-term goals? The people I networked with were the comics who, after 10 years, were also living in Chicago and making a good living. That's what I needed to know how to do.
Yeah. And networking, I still feel networking is very important, because you're not gonna get as far as fast if you don't have somebody in your corner and somebody that's rooting for you. But comedy is a meritocracy. You have to, it's how good you are, and it's between you and the audience. And another comic can put a good word in for you that's a few rungs up the ladder from you, but in the end, you got to get in front of the audience and kill it, and that's how you really get the exposure and the stage time.
I think it's hard to outrun your actual talent by more than 5%.
Yeah.
Occasionally, you'll catch a lucky break, but that's your level of incompetence is pretty accurate in comedy.
See, that's the businessman talking. That's the old adage of you're always going to get promoted into a place where they discover you're incompetent and fire you.
It's a Peter principle.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a good networking can get you to your level of incompetence the quickest possible way.
Yep. And a lot of folks, some of them that I've talked to, I don't know if you've ever run into Mike Bova, but I talked to him, was it last week? I think it was last week. And the funny thing is, he got kind of thrown into comedy, and it was something that he didn't expect. And his first set was 45 minutes, and you talk about getting thrown into a level of incompetency, but he treaded water, and he said it wasn't great, but it was good enough that he wanted to keep doing it. And so he was another one that started a little bit later in life, and decided that was the way he wanted to go, and it's worked well for him. I think it's very interesting that you have you did a business-like approach to doing the comedy, but let's talk a little bit about the love of being on stage and doing the comedy itself. Obviously you got to find a voice, and you got to find out who you're going to be on stage. And what was it like for you to find out who you were and be able to connect with the audience and get that feedback that just made it something that you wanted to do for the rest of your life?
I was a writer learning how to perform. I think every stand-up is either a writer learning to perform or a performer learning to write. And I was absolutely a writer who's still learning how to perform.
Uh-huh.
I don't miss the stage when I'm not on it,
Okay.
but I would absolutely shoot myself if I thought I was never going to be in the room with a bunch of other comics
Yeah.
again. I like the company of the creative people, and I like the process of being funny by myself or with others.
Mm.
The selling it on stage is the hard part for me. It always has been.
Mm.
In terms of finding my voice, though, that's something that's an interactive on-stage experience. I don't think anyone can really find their voice with a paper and pencil. I think maybe novelists can, or poets,
Mm.
but in stand-up, you need to be both. Whether you're left-handed or right-handed, whether you're a writer or a performer, eventually you're going to need competence in both. And I think that voice in particular is a function of the performer filtering the work of the writer, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know if it's almost a tangible electric type of thing when you find out who you are when you're up there, because it's been, I didn't start until I was 50, and I messed around for probably 4 years not understanding what kind of comedy I wanted to do, and then when I finally got it, it was electric, and it felt like, oh, this is who I am, and all the writing goes to that now, and all the stuff that you did before just doesn't make any sense.
I think part of it is when you let your vulnerability out, there's a certain electricity involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing psychoanalysis rather than stand-up comedy, you'd say you had a breakthrough.
Yeah. That's what it feels like, and it's actually kind of emotional, and I remember that first time when it went really well for me, and it when people come up to you and say you did great, and that it was great to hear you do your comedy, and it really hit with me and stuff like that. That's the coolest thing, and it was funny. I actually got paid a little bit for that show too, so it was a double good one.
I'll tell you something along those lines that I learned probably my second or third year. I was starting to feature on the road, and if you've had this experience, you'll identify immediately. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I'd add 5 to 10 new minutes of material a week. Now, remember, when I say that, I was doing 5 or 6 shows, so It wasn't that difficult to add new stuff.
Right.
And I'm a good writer, purposeful writer, and a lot of the new stuff would work, but it seemed like I still always only had a half hour's worth of dependable material.
Uh-huh.
I talked to one of my roommates at the time. I lived in this great 4-bedroom that was almost all comics for 20 years. It was just a comedy commune. And A.J. Lentini's his name. He said, you're moving in the fences. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when you start out, you're doing 5 minutes. If you got 5 minutes of funny stuff, it could be old jokes, it could be knock-knock jokes.
Mm-hmm.
If they're funny, people will laugh, because in 5 minutes, all they're expecting from you are jokes. He says, but for a half hour, they're expecting something more.
Mm-hmm.
So as you work, the things that they are going to react most strongly to are the ones that are the easiest for them to believe are about you.
Yep.
So the fences get narrower and narrower, and there's fewer jokes. So a joke that you used to be able to get laughs with because it was inside the fences hadn't changed at all. You You're not telling it differently, but now it's outside the fence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought I understood what he meant, and then I went out the road right around Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And for years in Chicago, as an MC, you have a lot of holiday jokes.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of weather jokes because they're the easiest way to make it sound like you're fresh.
Yeah. Yeah.
About today and now. Well, I had a Halloween joke that always worked. I didn't even like it. I didn't even get it, but it always worked. It was, it's so sad these days. I took my daughter trick-or-treating. Then we have to take the treats to the hospital to get them x-rayed. So sad. And this year especially, because they found a spot on the gingerbread man's lung, he had to stay 3 extra days for tests and shit. Now, I don't know why it worked, but it always worked.
Yeah.
Other comics wanted to buy the joke from me. I can't. My Halloween joke. Flash forward a couple of years, I'm on the road, and it's Halloween. I call home. My daughter's 12, right when they start thinking maybe they're not going to go trick-or-treating. So I call, "You going to go trick-or-treating?" "Yes, I am." "What are you going to dress as?" She says, "A hippie." So I go on stage that night and I go, "I hate Halloween. You know what it's like? Just talk to my daughter. She's going trick-or-treating. It's 3-4 months. She's sitting there going, what would be really scary? Oh, I know. How about my dad's youth?" Now, I got a nice little laugh. I think the word youth is funny.
Yeah.
But it was also a little piece of vulnerability. In my head, I'm thinking, well, if that got a laugh, wait till they hear the gingerbread man's joke. Predictably, looking back, I tell that he had to stray 3 extra days from test. Here's the reaction. In other words, you just told us something that we believed was true.
You got it. Yeah.
And now you're telling us just a joke.
Yeah.
I thought you wanted to hear jokes. Not for half an hour.
Yeah.
For half an hour, we want to hear you funny.
Yep.
Now, if you can do that in the form of jokes and kind of hide them in there in the conversation, great. But we want to hear you funny.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're being you on stage, it's a lot more tags than it is punchlines. Well,
things keep occurring to you because it's you.
Yeah. And that's for me particularly, that is the only way I can remember my material is if it comes from me. If it's something that I write that is during this COVID stuff, it's been hard for me to write. It's because you don't see an end to it. I'm not socializing. The only family member I'm with is my wife most of the time, and the kids. I've got kids, and one in Alabama and one in DC. So we're not seeing them like we normally do. So there's nothing new to write. So I'm forcing myself to write these current events jokes. So I'll pull up USA Today, and I got that from Zany when I was talking to him. He says, every day I open up USA Today and write a few jokes from that, and sometimes they work and sometimes I don't, but I make myself write those out. I don't remember them. I have to write them out because I have no idea what I wrote.
And then forget about them.
Yeah. But
wait now.
Yeah, but
I just want to keep the muscle.
Yeah. It's just so I can remember how to write. So when something actually comes up, I can put it down on paper.
Before this all happened, for about a year or so, I'd been hosting a writer's circle at my house every other Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I got about 40 comics. The word goes out. We're going to have one this Sunday, this time. And the first 7 people to sign up, that's the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And got a table in my basement just covered with snacks. And we're great. Mm-hmm. Well, now we tried doing it online hard.
It is.
Hard.
Yeah.
So last Sunday, I had my first one in my yard because the weather was good, and we kept social distance, and it was just 4 of us. People don't really, we didn't work on material. We worked on theory of material. When this is over, what can and can't we talk about?
Yeah.
Obviously, we have to talk about what just happened Because if you ever shared something with an audience, this is it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine during the Depression doing comedy without talking about the Depression.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. How did you afford tickets?
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of it. The other part of it, though, is you think about all the things that are going on during this common experience, which divide us. So it's like saying, the law of the land says abortion is legal, so clearly we can talk about it on stage. Whichever position you take, if you take a position, you've divided the audience. So let's talk about what's happened for the last 2-3 months, but let's talk about it in either minute terms or huge terms. But if you just do it the way we've had to look at it, that sort of fixed focus, 10 feet away snapshot.
Yeah.
Everybody's tired of that snapshot.
Yeah.
Write a bit about sourdough bread. Go right ahead.
Yeah.
But don't talk about masks. We're done talking about masks.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, the only way that's going to work is really personal experiences, and not necessarily the personal experience of going through the quarantine and the pandemic, but how you coped and things crazy things that you did that got you through it. And I do have in mind a bit, because I've got a grandson out there in the DC area, and he's going to turn 2 in a couple months, and all the video chats that we do with him, there's a lot of good material in that, because he's starting to talk and all that good stuff. So I think that type of thing would work, because it's a little bit heartwarming, and it's not it's sad that we can't be out there, but it's nice that we at least have the technology to talk to him and be face to face with him.
First thing I thought of when you told me about your situation was, you were there when you got married. Was there any time in the vows when you thought, I promise to be with you 24/7 for 3 months at some portion of our lives?
Yeah.
No.
That's good. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Seriously, think of how many couples in an audience, if you do a bit about, I love my wife. Boy.
Yeah.
I wish that my backyard was at least 3 square miles.
Yeah. And a shed with
couples just looking at each other going, I love you too, honey. But
yeah, that's definitely true. And that I could get a lot of material out of that. I wanted to, one of the things that you've done is, you talk about the writing group. You've obviously got a lot of friends, clout, connections in the Chicago area, and you've done a lot of teaching and coaching of comics. Can you run me through that, when that started and how you got into it, and what you've gotten out of that, and people that you've worked with?
Well, and again, I think part of it is a function of starting when I was older, and I'd already had 10 years of professional teaching on my resume. I tend to be naturally analytical. Mm-hmm. So when I started doing stand-up, I was a sponge and just wanted every comic I worked with, whether they had more or less experience than me, I didn't care. Tell me what you know. Mm. Tell me what you know. And I tried codifying it as I went along. And by the time I've been in maybe 5-6 years, I got a part-time gig teaching sort of an adult extension class at Columbia College in Chicago. And that was kind of fun. I did it for a couple of semesters. And then I got too busy. I was doing other stuff. Mm. And about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, Dobie Maxwell, of the Maxwell Method, he had been teaching a class at Zanies, which is our sort of original comedy club here in Chicago, one of the originals, still open, still going strong, sort of considering. And he'd been teaching it and was kind of burning out on it a little bit. And he knew that I had taught a class and that I was constantly threatening to write a book about what I knew, which I haven't. But he asked me if I would be willing to sit in and help him out a little bit. Sure, why not? And we co-taught for a while. And then he just said, you do it. And I'll teach the advanced session. There's never been an advanced session. I've been teaching the beginner's class for going on 12 years, maybe. And they keep asking. I threatened to teach it, but to me, that's something that Dobie said he was going to do, and let them bug Dobie. As long as I'm teaching the beginner's class, I'm quite happy.
Yeah. So when you're doing this teaching, you've obviously seen a whole bunch of students. Can you break it down to different types of comics that you've seen? It seems like I see like maybe 3 or 4 different types of comics. Do you see different types come through the class that are just naturally that way, or how do you size them up when they get started?
Because it's the beginner's class, probably, I tend not to categorize them as comics, but as people. Unfortunately, in a beginner's class, what you get are a lot of people who want to show you their impression of a stand-up comic. And the worst thing you can do as a stand-up comic is to be a different stand-up comic than who you are.
Yeah.
It starts with who you are as a human being, and you sort of sharpen that into a stand-up comic rather than, here's what a stand-up comic looks like to me. The analogy I always use is, if you ever watched a Little League baseball game and you see this 8-year-old go up to the plate, very carefully knock the mud off their spikes, take their stance, and you're laughing your ass off because A, there's no mud, and B, they're not wearing spikes.
Yeah.
What are you doing? But they've seen that.
Yeah.
They want to look like, no.
Yeah.
The ball. Focus on the ball.
Yeah.
The ball. Stop worrying about your spikes or where the trademark on the back. Get the ball. and with stand-ups or with beginners, a lot of time they want to show how much they look like a stand-up comic. Well, or sound like, or write in the manner of. And it is absolutely the wrong end of the stick to grab a hold of. There are things you can learn from watching other stand-up comics, but the number one thing on the list, if you watch every great stand-up comic, is be yourself, or at least be someone that we can believe is yourself.
Yeah.
If you're a great actor and you can convince us that you're somebody completely different from who you really are, God bless you.
Yeah. Well, like Larry the Cable Guy, he's worked that for years.
Or Rodney Dangerfield.
Yep.
Who got more respect than Rodney Dangerfield?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Right.
He's the most respected comic in America.
So you've got these. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So you've got these fresh faces coming in, and obviously they all have different goals and ambitions. But have you ever seen any naturals, anybody that just you just say, okay, you're it. You're somebody who should be doing this,
or you're someone who could be doing it.
Yeah.
I hate using words like should.
Yeah.
It's a little too aggressive.
Yeah.
But, you're someone who could be doing it, and I'd say about half of the ones who could be doing it want to. And then, unfortunately, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do it, then you shouldn't.
Right.
I'm much more willing to tell you what you shouldn't than tell you what you should.
Yeah.
Should is your choice, but shouldn't. We all get a voice in there.
Yeah.
If I don't tell you, audiences will.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
And that happens maybe every other class. Someone will come up and I'll go, "Ooh, I can see where that's a seed that has already germinated a little bit, and it'd be interesting if they let it grow."
Mm. Now, have you seen any of those in the years that you've done it? Have you seen anybody actually make it?
Oh yeah, I've got comics out there. I don't want to name names.
Yeah. I won't ask you to. Yeah, that's got to be a great feeling.
It's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
Not as great as the 3 students that I've had in regular school who became school principals.
Yeah.
Or the dozens who became teachers. That's something.
Yeah.
That's something. I mean, it's just bigger.
Right.
But not bad. I'll take the other as well.
Yeah. No doubt. One of the things you talked about early on, I always like to hit on something that will actually resonate with the people who are listening, because this is for new comics and comics that want to get better. You talked about the adrenaline effect and how that's not necessarily a good thing. It's the thing that gets you on stage sometimes, but it's not. It keeps you from being in the moment. What types of exercises and things do you teach the comics to kind of work off that adrenaline so that they're still there, they still got enough energy to go up there and do well, but they're not so hyped up that they're talking as fast as I am right now.
The only thing really that shuts off that adrenaline flow is experience. It's behavioral therapy where you face the same thing which your amygdala identifies as a threat. You face it long enough that eventually you condition that amygdala to not recognize it as a threat. That can take years.
Yeah.
And I've talked to comics who, like I have, recognized that gradual decline in the effects of adrenaline. You go, I wish I had just a little bit more. And I don't miss any of it.
Yeah.
Here's the effects of adrenaline. We think of it as energizing. It's also sweat making.
Yeah.
It's also focus narrowing.
Yeah.
It's also skin tailing. Butterfly, those are the effects of adrenaline. And none of them work in the modern world most of the time. Adrenaline and the adrenal gland was part of our evolutionary history when we lived a much more dangerous life day to day. People in the modern world have to book adrenaline experiences. I'm going to jump out of an airplane next month.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah.
But your great grandparents just had to walk to the outhouse to have that same possibility of snakes and bears and pumas. Right now, the fight or flight is one of the most useless things left to us most of the time. You're going to ask your boss for a raise on Monday. Which do you prefer, fight or flight? Are you going to run home at lunchtime so you can avoid the meeting, or are you going to go up and beat him up until he gives you a raise?
Yeah.
In the 21st century, the survival skill we need more is the third one, the non-adrenaline play dead until the bear goes away skill.
Yeah.
The be cool skill, don't ever let them see you sweat skill.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with adrenaline.
Right.
Adrenaline makes it hard to be cool. That's why cool people don't get adrenaline.
Yeah.
Cool. I had a comic friend of mine. We were talking about how do we know other comics when we see them. Comics can spot other comics.
Uh-huh.
His reason was easy. He said, I've always thought the comic was always the coolest person in the room.
Uh-huh.
And there's something to be said about that as long as you don't hang out with jazz musicians.
Yeah.
We look like idiots. But so what do you do to mitigate the influence of adrenaline before you go up on stage? As long as your amygdala sees that still as a possible danger, risk, threat, you're going to get adrenaline. Two things that I have discovered and I preach endlessly. Number one, adrenaline is a very short-lived hormone. If it lasted more than 5 minutes, your body would blow up.
Yeah.
It's why you see so many comics at an open mic do a hot 2 minutes at a mile a minute, and then they look at you like they've suddenly blanked on everything else. Well, that was the adrenaline.
Yeah.
You ran out. You ran out.
Yeah.
And now you got nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is, before you go on stage, burn off the adrenaline. Jumping jacks, pacing, anything that activates the big muscles of your lower body. Even if it's just going up on your toes and back down rapidly for a couple of minutes. It's amazing how much adrenaline you can burn off before you hit the stage. The second thing, I thought I invented, but I didn't. 2 cups of coffee, which sounds so counterproductive. But turns out caffeine uses the same receptors in our brain as adrenaline does.
Okay.
So you're really blocking the adrenaline.
Yeah.
You go, your body goes, I'll make some. You got that covered. Never mind.
Okay.
The cool thing about caffeine is, as we all know, we've all had a caffeine buzz. It goes up and then it plateaus for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how adrenaline goes.
Yeah.
Minutes.
Yeah.
So even if you still get an adrenaline buzz while you got a caffeine high going, it's just like a little pimple.
Yeah.
When the adrenaline runs out, you don't even notice because you still got caffeine.
Yeah.
That you're shooting at.
Yeah. The adrenaline's gone by the time you get behind the mic. Yeah.
But you have to adapt to the caffeine buzz.
Right.
But the thing about caffeine is we can practice using caffeine. Most of us do every single day.
Yeah.
Sometimes twice.
Yeah.
Get on the coffee bandwagon.
Yeah, that really makes sense. I had never thought of that before, but yeah, that totally makes sense. And one of the things I've done, because comedy is such a mental thing, and it's the mental state that you are in that causes the adrenaline. Is when I'm sitting there, like for an open mic or whatever, I make it a point to really pay attention to the comics that go before me instead of thinking about my act. And even if it's stuff I've heard 100 times or whatever, I really pay attention to what they are saying and get in the moment with them and try to be a good audience member. And then when it's my turn, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I just go up and do my thing. So the
conversation continues.
Yeah, it's just a mental trick I have to play on myself.
It does a few things for you, but the main two. Number one, if you listen to all the other comics, you know where the audience is at.
Yeah.
And people think learning how to read an audience is something you do from the stage. No. It's something you do from the back of the room and carry with you on stage.
Mm.
You've had the opportunity to listen to that audience until you were brought enough. If you're the MC, you haven't got a lot to go on except what they sounded like before the show started.
Mm.
High energy, low energy. Is there a buzz in the room?
Yeah.
And what do they look like?
Right.
But the advantage of closing a show is always all this other information you have about this audience.
Yeah.
Second thing is, and this is something that I learned from Jimmy Wiggins, if you can focus on what the other comics are doing, find a joke that they just set up for you and open with that.
Mm. Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you look like so in the moment.
Yeah.
Everything else you do is going to seem fresh.
Yeah.
He had one of the greatest spur-of-the-moment opening lines anyone's ever heard. He's working a biker bar in southern Indiana that's owned by Larry Bird.
Okay.
Larry Bird didn't open up a biker bar. It just turned into one.
Yeah.
When it opened, it was a Larry Bird bar.
Uh-huh.
So memorabilia all over the world, all over the walls. But it's biker. Not, you either like working to bikers or you don't.
Yeah.
I've discovered that they are great audiences because they don't have a lot of boundaries.
Yeah.
And they're not afraid of you.
Right. Yeah.
You never have to ask the bikers to sit up front.
Yeah.
They're already
Yeah.
there. Sometimes they have to ask you to come a little closer.
Yeah.
Anyways, working down there with two less experienced comics, both of whom are terrified and terrorized by the audience and heckled mercilessly. They're just no peace.
Oh, yeah.
Here comes Jimmy Wiggins, all 5'3", dressed in black with his hippie outfit on and his cane and his long white hair. And he goes up on stage, doesn't say a word, just walks around the stage examining all the things on the wall until the audience gives up and shuts up. What is going on? They can't figure out. And at that moment of silence, walks to the microphone and goes, I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never worked a room with this much bird shit on the wall. Now he owns it.
Yeah.
He owns it.
That's great.
You see, a lot of guys want to start with your second strongest bit. He said, no, start with something that sounds like you just thought of it on the way to the stage.
Mm-hmm.
I've always tried to write something on my way to the gig. If it's good enough, I'll use that. But if something better comes up before the gig,
Mm-hmm.
if something better than that comes up during the gig, I just did my first Zoom broadcast, 19 other comics.
Uh-huh.
And I'm up number 18. So I got to listen to every premise I can think of getting burned to the ground. Well, it's all COVID stuff, and at least I'd say half of the women comics talked about not wearing a bra.
Uh-huh.
So my opening line was, for those of you keeping score, I am wearing a bra. And just to break the ice. And yeah, I've been listening just like you.
Yeah.
So we're already connected.
Yep. Yep.
It's a great habit to get into. So listening to comics gives you material, gives you information about the audience,
Mm-hmm.
but you already said the most important thing, which is keeps you in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Your material's in your head. Remembering it should not be an issue.
Yeah.
If I asked you, tell me about meeting your wife, tell me about your first job, tell me about where you went to high school, you wouldn't have to go, wait, let me see if I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's instantly accessible because it's all over your brain.
Yeah.
That's the way your act should be.
Yeah.
It should be so much you that you can talk about 5 minutes about forgetting what your act is.
Yep. Yep.
It'd be funny doing it.
Yep. And you are right on point. I've experienced the whole thing of doing my 5 minutes and 2 minutes, and it's like the worst feeling. You're like, okay, how much time do I have left? And 3 minutes. Feels like you've been up there forever. And everybody has to go through that. You gotta experience that a couple times so that you know how to correct it and come back from it.
You just reminded me of a moment that for a while Dobie would come on the last day of the class while I was teaching, because that would be the performance day.
Mm-hmm.
And he would come, and the two of us would give feedback. And I'll never forget this. About 6-7 years ago, guys on stage, and again, I'm going to do 5 minutes, but 2 minutes in, mind goes blank, and he just looks balefully at the audience and goes, "Oh, man, I forgot what." And from the back of the room, Dobie says, "Just say what you were going to say next." And I go, "Okay," and just went.
That's great.
It's amazing how we let ourselves get in our own way.
Yep.
And sometimes it just takes that little nudge.
Mm-hmm.
Say what you were going to say next.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay. The thing that was keeping him from remembering was him trying to remember.
Yep. Been there, done that. I wanted to touch on one thing because obviously when you start doing comedy, it gets your writing brain going. You've written some plays, and did that come from your experience writing comedy, or was that something totally separate for you?
But if you stay in comedy long enough, you get offered interesting gigs that are, I think of comedy as the hallway, and then there's these little side rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those side rooms are quite nice, like corporate work.
Yeah.
Is kind of nicer than the hall.
Yeah.
To be honest. But it's not the hall. People who do corporate work kind of focus on doing corporate work.
Yeah.
And occasionally someone from the hall gets invited in to do some work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the same thing is with one-man shows, college gigs, private parties, all of that stuff, writing for sitcoms,
mm-hmm.
doing podcasts. There's a lot of... Dobie always says that stand-up comedy is Pluto in terms of the performance solar system.
Mm-hmm.
And the proof of it is, if you've been on Pluto long enough, Venus is nothing. Check how many stand-up comics have become really very successful actors.
Yeah.
And then try to name how many very successful actors have legitimately been convincing stand-up comics.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. No.
Yeah.
It can't. Now, I don't think that's just because I'm a stand-up comic and I recognize, maybe mechanics recognize when actors are playing mechanics, that they're not. I get that. But I mean, general audiences would have a hard time thinking of stand-up, of great actors portraying successful stand-up comics. It's something that everyone can smell.
Yeah. Well, they've spent their whole life playing somebody else. So being, the whole thing about comedy is being yourself on stage. So, it's
somebody else is a break.
Yeah.
What a nice vacation.
Yeah. I mean, think of De Niro trying to really become a comic. It just couldn't happen because he gets into the character that he's in and becomes that character. And, him taking that to the stage would just being himself on stage, he's no Rupert Pumpkin, that's for sure.
I think part of it too is when you see an actor pretending to be a stand-up, he has or she has absolutely no fear of failure.
Yep. Yeah.
Unless it's in the script.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really count.
Yeah. 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 There's and they're not doing it to make the bread and butter. They're just doing it as a side job. It's just like if they become a musician or something like that on the side too. It's just something else they're doing, not what their passion is. So yeah, it makes sense.
So as I was doing stand-up comedy, particularly when I was doing it full time, when one of these little side doors opened up, I couldn't help but peek in and see what was going on. And I trained myself because I tend to be a cautious person.
Mm-hmm.
My instinct is to say, no, let me think about it.
Yeah.
I trained myself to say, yes, let me think about it.
Yeah.
And it got me into a lot of interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of interesting things, none of which panned into a full-time anything.
Mm.
I kept my focus. I remember years ago there was an agency strike in Chicago. The casting agents were still working. The production companies were still working, but actors were on strike against their representation.
I remember that.
All of a sudden, there were these casting agents at every open mic, every comedy show, looking for anybody who wasn't in a union, who could be half-heartedly into an ad. I did one regional ad that earned me more money in a year than I had earned at comedy in a year.
Wow.
This might be something to pursue.
Yeah.
So I called up the casting lady. She said, yeah, here, the strike is over. Go to talk to these agencies, see which one you like, tell me where you sign up, and I'll get you a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
First one I went to, sat down for the interview, and the guy said, well, you'd have to quit stand-up comedy. Why? I said, well, if you're filming, you can't be in Fort Wayne, Indiana doing a show. So I can drive back from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you have to do callbacks? So I can drive back from Fort Wayne. It just wouldn't work if you didn't quit stand-up comedy. So I said, thank you for your time. And I didn't even set up some other interviews. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't evenings when I look back and I go,
Yeah.
Commercial acting.
Yeah.
That's a good source of income in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, no doubt.
No, I think of the fun I would have missed, and I would be hanging out with actors instead of comics.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would prefer the comics over most of the actors. Yeah.
And nothing against, I know a lot of actors.
Yeah.
But comics are the more interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Most definitely. One of the things I like to ask everybody, and just because I like to have a record of it, is what 3 things do you know now about stand-up comedy that you wish you would have known when you first started out?
I wish I would have known how difficult it is to do stand-up comedy, to get successful at stand-up comedy while maintaining a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the reasons you see so many people in stand-up comedy at a young age is because they don't have any idea of the sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, I wish I had a better grasp of the amount of discipline that something that looks so undisciplined involved.
Yeah.
It looks like so much fun, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
But what pays off is the part that wasn't a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And self-discipline is sorely lacking in a lot of people who fail and blame other things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about how much time and effort you're willing to put in every single day.
Yeah.
Third thing, I wish I had known sooner how much comedy varies from region to region in the country. I think a lot of people naturally start out assuming that what's funny to everyone is what's funny to them, and to their friends.
Mm.
And then they work this out.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible to have larger themes and still have very personal comedy. And anytime you see a successful national act, you're seeing the truth of that.
Mm.
Jerry Seinfeld may seem a little New Yorkish.
Uh-huh.
James Gregory may seem a little Southernish, but they're talking about universal themes that are funny from sea to sea.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if people could recognize the difference earlier.
Mm.
I had known earlier about writing to the human condition rather than the Chicago story.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Chicago flavor is fine.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a national act, have a national sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So, though, that's great because that's 3 different ones than anybody else has ever said. So I have some overlap, and you've got 3 brand new things. So that's good. That's good. You get an A+.
But no, I'm dying to hear what the other people said.
Yeah. Well, just listen to all my episodes and you'll know. So some people only gave me 1, and some people gave me different variations of 1. But it's some of them were pretty good, and yours was excellent. Just because I started thinking about this when you talked about networking, and you and I are both pre-internet, pre-social networking. We grew up without all that stuff, and you're on Facebook and stuff like that, so you get to see what some of the comics do to promote themselves and stuff like that. Do you feel like if social networking and the internet was around when you first started, do you think you would have dove into that social networking aspect and used it, or do you think you would have just done things on your own?
I probably ignore it more than I should.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am probably more retired than most of my friends. I stopped calling people for work 23 years ago.
Mm.
And I'm still working, well, not current, but I'm still working enough to keep me happy.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like going out and trying to take work away from people who need it more than I do. I'm okay with that. But you postulated a very different question. If the internet was around back then, would I have networked differently? And I, of course I would have. But I think the most successful part of your network, the part of your network that will eventually feed you, is the part of the network you can feed.
Mm.
So I've got a lot of Facebook friends, some of whom I've actually met.
Yeah.
And I know that there are people whom I have never met who take me more seriously than some of the people that I have met.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, they are key components to my network.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met Linda Parrott, but I like to think that if I had an issue that I needed resolved in LA, she would be someone that would help me resolve that issue.
Yeah.
But I've always taught, feed your network and your network will feed you. If you cannot feed your network in some way, shape, or form, your network has no impulse to feed you. In which case, it is not what you would call a network.
Right.
It's just a net.
Yep.
And there's a difference. A net is an inanimate series of connections.
Yeah.
A network works.
Yeah, I think.
And this is how the network worked for me back in the day and still does. I told you, lived in a big comedy commune. 4 comics, no waiting. Plus, we had a guest room. A lot of road comics would come to Chicago and be shocked that if you weren't a headliner, this richest city in the Midwest wouldn't give you a motel room.
Yeah.
You work in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, you get a motel room as an MC. You come to Chicago, if you're not a headliner, go find someplace.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Because there's no comics in Chicago. Why do we need your road butt?
Yeah.
You know? Anyway, lots of comics. The guy who manages Zanies still talks about it. He said, I love those days because if I had a fallout for whatever reason, I just pick up the phone and I would call you guys. And if one of you weren't available, between the 4 of you, you knew who was in the city of Chicago. You were my one phone call shot.
Yeah.
And I tell it to people all the time. Someone calls you to do a job that you know you don't want and can't do. You still say yes. And you hang up the phone and you book that job. And you call the booker back. Now, you've fed your network. You've found work for someone who wouldn't have had it but for you.
Yeah.
And in a strange way, the booker is also a little obligated to you because they still only had to make one phone call.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you took nothing and turned it into 2 little chunks of obligation. Feed your network and your network feeds you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. The marketing books I read, they talk about what you need is 1,000 true fans. And once you get that, then you get exponential growth from that. And when you do that, you have to do it by feeding your network. You have to give them something to consume that is worth it for them, that makes them want to come back. And
the advantage of the internet is, if you want, that carrot on the stick is available 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
We've been seeing a lot of exponential growth graphs during the pandemic.
Yeah.
The difference between a virus that each person spreads to 2 people and a virus that each person spreads to 3 people, by the time you get out 10 iterations, is ginormous.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing. If I can convince 3 people each to tell 3 people, by the time you get out 10 iterations, that's millions of people.
Yeah.
But how do they know if you can't attach that to a video?
Yeah.
So I'm not solely in favor of people putting up every open mic they've ever done on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Because it's there forever.
Yeah.
But having a place where people can go to check you out, if you are serious about being a success down the road, I think absolutely essential.
Yeah. And
make sure that as you get better, you replace that.
Yeah.
Why having your own website to do it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's
and why I don't.
Yeah. It's work. The stuff I do for the podcast, it's amazing. The stuff, I make little video clips and stuff like that. And it takes, 20, 30 minutes just to do a minute on that, to get it edited and put the picture in and do the captions and all that kind of stuff. And you just think about that, and that's work. But it's what you got to do if you're gonna do it. And I still know a couple of them that don't use social media at all, and they're doing okay, and they're youngsters in the comedy world, but the majority of them, they've got some sort of a presence, and the ones that really hit it out of the park are the ones that just put up a lot of content, interact with their fans, and really, just do the right thing. And, Gaffigan does that. Gaffigan does it really well.
The balance beam is always giving it away for free, making them want more.
Yeah.
If you give it all away, when they want more, they expect it to be free.
Yeah.
You got to give just enough so they want more, and then they're willing to pay.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Well, this has been a great talk, Bill. I appreciate you coming on the show, and yeah, I got some good revelations out of it, and I think everybody's going to enjoy this episode. It was great talking to you.
Cool.
Do you have anything? Do you have anything coming up that you'd like to plug?
I just booked. I had some offers that I turned down, but I just booked my first post-COVID show.
Okay.
September 11th.
Oh, okay.
In Wisconsin.
All right.
I know Wisconsin will be around.
Uh-huh.
And I hope I'll be around.
Yeah.
Just hope the people in Wisconsin will be around.
Yeah.
Watching them all storm into the bars last week was kind of scary.
Give me comedy and give me a beer.
Well, it's just, let's protest for months that we need to get back to work. And as soon as the restrictions are off, heck with work, let's go to the bar.
Yep.
But that's why we love Wisconsin.
Yep. No doubt. Well, great. I look forward to hopefully catching you on the road. I've decided that when this is all over, I've been going north up into Michigan. I'm in South Bend area, so I'm not too far from Chicago. I had already made plans to start doing some mics in Chicago and meeting some people there. So hopefully someday that'll actually happen and I can do it.
Let me know.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for being on the show, and I really appreciate your insight. It was great.